this week and then next week, and then I think we'll be, what will next week be?
We could still go.
We could,
Yeah.
we'll see. We'll see what people are feeling. It might be that the Wednesday before Pesach. We'll see. We'll check in with everyone next week, but we're here this week for sure, and next week. And
all right.
And let's get going.
Welcome everybody. It's good to see everybody, and hopefully, maybe we actually could see people in person pretty soon, God willing. This next portion that we're going to be studying is not very long. We're just going to finish up chapter 4 here, but it's very close to my wife's and my heart, because it's going to describe things and articulate things that it's difficult to put into words. We've been privileged to have, and others in this class have been privileged to have this type of relationship with what he's calling a holy person, and it's hard to describe. And in a certain sense, when one describes it in words, it sounds weird. It's like, and so then it's like, oh, okay, that's it makes sense, but you sound a little bit. But when you're in it, it makes complete sense to have a relationship with such a thing called the holy person, or a person, and to describe that relationship. But on the other hand, as we will see, it is once you have it and once you experience it, and I'm sure Arthur could speak to this as well, very much so, it's hard to imagine a life in general, and particularly a Judaism, without it. Mm-hmm. And I would say that one of the great things that is lacking in the modern Jewish world is these opportunities to have these types of relationships with a truly holy person, because it changes one's perspective on life, and perspective on their own life, and perspective on what's relationship and what a relationship is between human beings, what it can be, and therefore what a relationship could be between a human being and God. Which at the end of the day, that's what the ultimate purpose is. So, and my wife and I see it over and over again in our journeys amongst the Jewish people, and people who come to us, or people we encounter that are having difficulty and struggles in their Jewish journey. And it seems to us that one of the fundamental things that is lacking is this type of relationship with a mentor, with a holy person. And it's hard to put in words, and that's how I'm going to start it from here. And therefore, when I read this part, I took a step back, and I was like, that sounds weird. But then I realized it's weird because he's trying to say something very deep, like he's always trying to do. But this hits home, so to speak, at least for me on a personal level. So now, with that great introduction, let's go into the actual text. We're on the third aspect of holiness regarding the human soul. Page 60 in this version over here, the second paragraph on page 60. A third aspect of holiness is that of the human soul, the sanctity of man. And even this holiness does not derive from man himself. A person may be great, wise, and full of the most excellent of virtues. He may even be a tzaddik or a chassid. But the essence of holiness comes to him only insofar as he is connected to God, the source of the holy. My wife just mentioned a story. You want to tell the story? Yeah.
I just heard it from Barak Holman.
Do you hear my wife, or is it hard
to
hear?
hear me?
You might have to speak up.
You tell it. You better tell it.
So, it basically, the story is that, in a nutshell, I can't remember.
Okay. A man buries his father, and his father keeps coming him in a dream. His father keeps coming to him in a dream, urging his son to convert to Christianity. Over and over. And his father was a frum man. These are, Hasidim. So the son is very, very distraught, and he goes to see Rav Zusha of Anapoli. And Rav Zusha says, he goes, I think that there's something wrong with your father's grave. Somehow a cross or a crucifix is somehow in your father's grave. So they go and they start digging up the father's grave, and they found that a coin somehow was in the dirt of the grave. Maybe one of the grave diggers, who knows, a local coin, and the coin had a cross on it. So they take the coin out, they bury it, the dreams stop. So somehow the Gra hears this, and he says, oh, Rav Zusha must have known that from the Yerushalmi, from Talmud Yerushalmi. And what's the punchline?
There's a source of the Talmud Yerushalmi that talks about this. And then the word gets back, so the word gets back to Zusha, saying that the Gaon of Vilna said that you know the Yerushalmi. And Rav Zusha said, I don't know the Yerushalmi. So they said, so how did you know it? So he says, I know it from where the Yerushalmi knows it. So the idea is that we keep on going back to this aspect of not forgetting the basis, not forgetting the basic premise that nothing is holy, including the Torah, okay, including the knowledge that we have, if the source isn't coming from God. And it's a very delicate point over here, because it's a very delicate balance here, because we've had innumerable times throughout generations, throughout history, of people trying to find or trying to forge a pathway to connect with the infinite, with God. And at the end of the day, the only way to do so is through Torah. That's what Judaism says. The only pathway from a finite being to connect with the infinite being is the only way to do it is by way of the infinite telling you how to do it. Because there is no jump. There is no connection. So the only connection is through Torah. But so that means Torah is very, very important and is the only pathway. But at the same time, Torah is only holy because its source is coming from God. And anything that is holy is because it's coming from God. So it's a very delicate balance to play over here, to understand at the end of the day where the source is coming from, and to understand what God makes into holy, what he does not make into holy things. So this is what Rabbi Steinsaltz is saying here, is that a person may be great, wise, a tzaddik, a chassid, and all these different things, right? But the essence of holiness comes to him only insofar as he is concerned to God, the source of the holy. He's connected to God. He keeps on going back to this. So that's a very important point, fundamental and relevant in our lives at the end of the day. So let's go on. A person may be connected with the source of holiness in several ways. There is a holiness that is inherited. Remember, we talked about last time, that, especially coming up to this time of year with the holiday of Pesach, that breaks through boundaries, passes over these chapters. This chapter in particular is talking about there are certain things in the world that are set and have an order. And that's the way it is because that's the way it is. Same thing over here in this particular connection with the source of holiness. It is because it is. This is the way it is. Why? Because God said so. Certain type of people, certain family, they're connected to holiness just because it is. They're inherently holy. So that's what Rabbi Steinsaltz says here. There's a holiness that is inherited, that belongs to the family, given by God to those who serve him in a certain way. He added over here a certain way, right? But the Kohen, and this is all the Torah portions, right? The Parshiyot that are talking about the Kahuna, the priesthood. They are a holy family. They have to dress a certain way. That's why they're inherently holy. Let's go on. That's exactly what he says. Here, one may include the holiness of Israel as a whole, or that of the sons of Aaron, their hereditary priesthood. Then there is the more meaningful consecration that comes from the communion of man with God, such as may be attained, for example, through the mitzvot. Okay, again, it's not just I can be connected. it's very, very delicate, this balance. I keep on saying it over and over again, because if you go 1 degree to this direction and 1 degree to this direction, you're missing the point. Rav Zusha can know the same source from where the Yerushalmi holds because he was immersed in mitzvot and he became a holy person. Okay? There is no other way. But at the same time, he can surpass or override or get the wisdom and the holiness from the same place that the Yerushalmi is getting it from. But it's only through going through the pathways of the Torah and mitzvot. You can't do it in any other way. Becoming very spiritual, for instance, not through Torah, which is possible, you're still not going to connect that to that the holiness that we're talking about. At the same time, just like he said before, just doing the Torah mitzvot are not necessarily going to make that person connected to the holiness in the same way Zusha was. Do you understand how it's both? I'm putting both together over here. Is it? You understand what I'm saying?
I think it's subtle, but I think let's keep going.
Okay. So, adhering completely to the holy precepts for contact and refraining entirely from wrongdoing envelops a man in a constant, ceaseless communion with God. So that already creates a certain type of holiness with a person who's becoming a tzaddik. But there are levels. Beyond this, he goes on, is the more intellectual union with the divine holiness through study and knowledge of the Torah. When man puts his very life and soul into studying the Torah and makes himself thoroughly familiar with the laws and the commandments, he becomes bound up in Torah, which is one of the manifestations of the supreme holiness. Rabbi Steinsaltz described really learning Talmud over and over again and getting deeper and deeper. One of the reasons why we're doing it, I mean, this is not Rabbi Steinsaltz's novel. He's taking it from somewhere, obviously, but I heard him speak about it a couple of times, is that you're starting to learn how God thinks. When you get into the same type of mindset and understanding, you're getting in, it's as if you're going into God's brain, okay, and understanding how he perceives the world. And that's one of the reasons why it's such like the Tanya says, the union that is created through learning of Torah, there's no greater union than that, because you are connecting on the highest level of intellect. You're almost like becoming part and parcel of the way God is perceiving the world. If you really get it, and you really start thinking the way the Talmud is thinking. Okay.
With all due respect, and I mean this with all due respect, it sounds quite arrogant.
Which part?
To assume that we can what's the word I'm looking for? That we can think that we can think like God thinks. If we can't imagine infinity, right, which is God is infinite, how can we, no matter how much we study, if that's all we do is study and live a compassionate and good life, how do we know that if we can know the Talmud and know the Torah, we think that we can assume to think that we have a sense, a little bit, maybe a molecule of understanding how God thinks. How could we know that? It just sounds arrogant to me. And I mean it. You're right.
It does sound arrogant. You don't sound disrespectful in any way. I don't think that we're even saying we have a molecule. I would say maybe it orients us in some direction of being able to think a little bit about how God might think.
It's not. It's there is no disrespect here at all, Nathan, at all.
I love the question.
You're asking a very, very deep question. And one of the ways of answering that is the way my wife answered. A little more subtle or little subtle difference is that, again, always going back to the source. God is allowing us to, it's not arrogant. God is allowing us, he allowed us to peek into, like the Wizard of Oz, here, have it take a look just a bit behind the curtain. He's allowing us. So he is degrading himself, okay? He's lowering himself, and he's allowing you to be a part of something, okay? You're not going to get the whole thing, obviously. Even Moses didn't get the whole thing, and that is impossible because it'll blow our minds literally, right? Because we just don't have the vessels. We can't contain the great wisdom and everything about it. It's just impossible for us. We're finite. He's infinite. But he did us a favor, and he's allowing us to peek behind the curtain and have a peek at it. But whatever we're seeing and whatever we're understanding is not, in a certain sense, it's very deep what you're asking, but it's not diluted. It is the thing itself. He is actually thinking this way. It's not all of his thoughts, but it might be one or two. It is a molecule. It is, he's allowing us to take a peek, a glance at, because I'll give you an example.
It's like a lover who says,
yes, exactly. Yeah, it's very scary.
Right? It's like, I mean, if it's really the ultimate romance, if you will,
That word.
love affair. He's obsessed with us. Not just that we're obsessed with him. He's obsessed with us, right? And how much? I mean, you could be married to someone. I mean, I'm only married for 21 years, okay? But let's say you're married to someone for 50 years. How much do you really know them? You get little nuggets of truth, nuggets of like little peeks into their mind or into their essence that you really, and that's what's so fascinating about any relationship. It keeps unfolding. You still keep learning things that you never knew about your spouse of 50 years, but you'll never really know all of them. You might get some familiarity, the scent of their perfume, but it's real, but it's not the whole thing at all. But that's intimacy. That's like real intimacy, that you do allow the other into knowing some piece of you, some deeply authentic piece, but there's no way to reveal all of it.
The Medrash says that the first word of the Ten Commandments, which we read about a couple of weeks ago, right? The first word is Anochi, right? I am the Lord your God, and it starts with Anochi. And the Medrash says that Anochi is an acronym for Ana Nafshit Ktavit, Ana Nafshit Ktavit Yahavit. Ana, I, Nafshit, the Nun, my own soul, I've written down and I've given to you. So God is saying, here's the Torah. What is the Torah? It's my innermost desires. It's my soul. It's what I'm made up of. This is what I want, how I want to be manifested and expressed in this world. And it may be just in this world the most mundane things, the most materialistic things, but it's still my desire. And once you touch upon one piece of the person's desire, that's the most intimate thing you can have. So you're absolutely right. We can't grasp everything. But what God allows us to see, and we do grasp it, we're grasping something that is at its essence, the deepest part, because that's his desire. That's what he wants. That's what he wants to have in the world. And he wants you to know it. And he wants you to think about it. And he wants you to think in these different directions. So you're asking a great question of like, it's just a small part, not even a small part, but it's whatever that small nugget is, it's truth. It's real, because it's what God said, I want you to know this about me. I want you to know this. And I once heard a marriage therapist say that of all words, intimacy stands for into me see. God is saying, I want you to see into me. I want to be intimate with you. Into me see. I want to expose myself in the right way, right? I want to expose myself to you, right? I want to show you who I am, right? Sometimes he, you know.
No, sorry, I'm watching who's smiling. I know.
So let's go on. So I appreciate that. It's all
It's an
respect.
excellent question.
Yes. Okay. So let's go up to a little higher, a lot higher. Higher still is a man's ability to surrender himself, to relinquish his own will and being to God's will. Okay. Now we're getting to this concept of Zusha. How is Zusha able to know where this nugget, this truth of the same way the Yerushalmi knew it? Because he doesn't exist. He doesn't have any will in himself, so he's completely subservient to the will of God. So whatever he's going to say, he just knows that that's what God wants. When a man reaches such a level of renunciation, wow, what a great word, he also attains a level of sanctification that reveals itself in different ways according to his spiritual capacities. Let me go on because I want to finish this also. Right. Sometimes man surrenders himself to divine holiness only within the realm of Torah and mitzvot. Striving further, he may reach a certain identification with something that is known only in terms of the higher wisdom in him. Getting to the higher place, you know, it's getting to the source of it all. If he should attain to a union of such great force, he's able to respond to the divine influence and be vouchsafed of revelation of the Holy Spirit, and his whole life would change accordingly. This is what we're talking about, this idea of that our forefathers were the chariots. That's how the Gemara terms Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that they were chariots of God. Meaning there was nothing of themselves. They were completely nullified, renunciated. Renounced? Okay. Well, okay, their renunciation. This level has indeed been achieved by many great men throughout history, their adherence to mitzvot and Torah by their whole way of life. And above this level are select few from time to time in human history are privileged to be so receptive to divine plenty that they are given prophetic power. Complete renunciation. And even with respect to prophetic power, one may distinguish levels. There are prophets to whom prophecy comes as a transient vision. They feel as though a higher power compels them and produces in them images and ideas. On a higher level is the Shekhinah who speaks in the throat. Let's quote about Moshe. When all his life the prophet is in some connection with the divine will, and he himself serves as an instrument of revelation. And at the highest level of holiness are those persons who have achieved a state in which their whole personalities and all of their actions are inseparably joined to the divine holiness. Of these persons, it is said that they have become a chariot for the Shekhinah, and like the chariot, they are totally yielded to the one who sits on the driver's seat, the throne of glory, and they constitute a part of the throne of glory itself, even though they are flesh and blood, men like all other men. This is something so foreign to us sometimes and so scary for us. And in a certain sense, we resist this, or I resist it. Speaking of I resist this because we have seen too many quacks and too many fakes from many different religions, including Judaism, who people followed because they thought that this person became like this. And it led down to very dangerous paths. And so therefore, it's just, we've been scarred too many times with this concept. So it's scary. Do we even believe in such a thing? Do we even want such a thing? To follow a person or to connect to, and he's going to talk about connecting to this type of person, or to even believe that there's such a thing as this type of person that has no will or desire of their own anymore. That their will and desire is God's will and desire. That's very, very, very scary, because that gives a lot of power to a human being. But it is, Rabbi Steinsaltz is not embarrassed to say the truth the way it is. There exists such a thing. There is such a thing as people in the world that are not of this world. They are not, they look like flesh and blood, but they're not. Very dangerous. It reminds us a little bit of another religion, though.
They are flesh and blood.
But it's interesting. I've heard Rabbi Shalom say a couple of times that he says there's a medrash, or it's a medrash that describes when the Torah describes Moshe Rabbeinu. It calls him Ish Elohim. And it says, and the Medrash says something, Rabbi Steinsaltz, which I saw him shudder. He says, and the Medrash says, before we're going to say this, maybe it shouldn't be said, but it basically says there in the Medrash, part man, part God. Ish and Elohim. Right? And it's a dangerous thing to say, but it is.
Right, but it's not saying it's a demigod like in Greek or Roman.
We always go back
it means
to
that the self of that person is so nullified that it's really almost like they, as we're saying, a trait, are just a vehicle for God.
Now, Rabbi Stein does not go in this chapter. This is something I think is a little bit missing, to tell you the truth. He doesn't go in to the practicalities of how do you know? How do you know? How does a person like me know? How can you tell? He's right now describing again the plumbing, like he does a lot. He's just describing what is. He's not telling you what's the litmus test.
He's not telling you how to discern who really has a problem and who's not.
Right. Right. And that may be because.
No, that's not what this book is for.
Well, also.
In other places he does. In other places he does.
But I think it's missing here.
Okay.
And I think on the other hand, I think he's omitting it on purpose. Because just like he's describing a reality of it is because it is, this is the way it is, he's also trying to say that you'll know it when you know it. You'll know it when you see it. When you experience it, when you encounter a type of person like this, you'll know. You'll know if you're open to it. And if you're not fooling yourself. You don't disagree?
Hold on. I mean, I agree. The problem is, like all kinds of, is that a lot of people who think they know really don't know.
Also, right. That's the danger. I'm not saying there's no danger in it.
Right. There's a lot of dangers. The question is, I think he does talk about this in other places. About listen, there's no perfect litmus test for a person for a chassid who's looking for a Rebbe. Okay,
right.
That's very hard. It's very hard.
No
Ultimately,
there's no litmus. Go back to the thing. There's no litmus test to know who you should marry.
Okay, but there's some people who are massively unsuccessful and make very bad choices.
Right, and if you.
I would say one of the things he does say somewhere else, I believe it's in his book too. I'm not sure. Maybe it's in the Strike the Spirit. I forget. Maybe Arthur will tell me. He talks about when you're looking for a rub, just a rub, you have to find someone who will be honest with you. Arthur, do you remember what I'm talking about?
You got to elaborate, I think.
I think I'm hearing you, and I agree with you.
But do you know where he says this?
He speaks about it in a couple of places.
He says it a couple of places.
I think in his book Tshuva.
Yeah, I think it's in Shuvah. But like, so that's the first place. But that's just finding a rub, not necessarily discerning who's a tzaddik, who's not. But I'll tell you right there, how very few people pass that most basic test. Okay, so it does get complicated. Unfortunately, Shmuel and I have met many people or witnessed people, particularly in Eretz Yisrael, who a lot of people treat like a tzaddik and clearly are not. You know, they are not vehicles for God; they're vehicles for their egos. But we should know this exists. It actually does exist. And it's not some weird, it's not hagiographic. We don't have to worry about, hagiography, making, worshiping men or making saints. It's a very, very subtle and different thing, but hopefully, but it exists. It exists. I've experienced it. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Let's go finish this up or continue. The life of a holy person becomes an example and a model for all men to follow. So now he's also making it even worse, this omission, or harder, or more difficult, or more challenging, because, okay, if I have to follow, so who is it? How do I know? He's not answering that. And a holy person may be a great king, or a saint tzaddik, a sage, or a leader of his age, but he also may be one of the hidden saints whose holiness goes unrecognized by men. Now it's really like a needle in a haystack, right? But in whatever manner the holiness shows itself, and no matter how intrinsic it may be to the personality of the man, it is still, this is kind of the answer over here, or he's hinting towards the answer of how do you know. It is still dependent on his connection with the divine plenty. Doesn't tell you a lot, but it's a beginning of a direction. It's all dependent upon that. And I guess that's the main fundamental question you have to ask yourself. Where is this coming from? Is this person a tzaddik in my eyes, a holy person, because he or she is connected to divine plenty or not? What does that mean? That's a whole other issue, but that's the first question that one should ask because of the next paragraph. The Torah itself is going to make it a commandment to revere and respect and follow that person. That's what even makes it even more difficult and more challenging. It's not just a nice idea on a romantic notion, this concept of connecting or modeling a person like this. Now it becomes a commandment in and of itself, not connected with the Torah that the person is teaching, but rather clinging to a person like this. Okay, well, let's go on. He's going to get to that, but he's going to describe something else over here. The ordinary man who has been granted contact with the holy person is thereby brought into a certain contact with true holiness. In this sense, the higher level of a saintly person's holiness, the more he's like an angel, and in a way even more than an angel, acting as a vehicle of holiness by transmitting divine plenty from one world to another and bestowing such plenty upon whomever he chooses through his blessings, his actions, his prayers. The individual who makes inner contact with such a holy person, showing him love and devotion, thereby supports the flow of divine plenty in the world. This is one of the fundamental aspects and directions of, especially of Breslov Hasidism, okay, which the Rav Nachman said everything is dependent upon the connection to the tzaddik. Any kind of abundance or source of plenty is by clinging to a tzaddik, to a holy person.
All Polish Hasidic people?
This is all the more so that they didn't articulate it and put it in an orderly fashion the way Rav Nachman did. Okay. Now Rabbi Shalom says this doesn't come from Breslov. This is what has been meant in Jewish tradition from time immemorial, when devotion has been shown to those persons who are superior in holiness or have an aura of sanctity. It's come from way before Hasidism came into the world, this concept. The gift is given such blessed men to create a bond of some sort that will draw them nearer, whether the holy person is connected to God by being a great Torah scholar of the Torah, a great scholar of the Torah, or whether he's just a saintly individual in his life. To honor, revere, and love the holy person is a mitzvah in itself, besides serving as a means for the direct contact with holiness. And just as interconnection with the holiness of place or time consecrates and raises one, so does the holy person. Although, to be sure, the additional factor of conscious transfer of blessedness makes this contact the most heart-stirring and consequential of all human relationships, because that person is still a human. And that is something that is difficult to put into words. This connection of that is developed between two human beings, of a holy person and a person who's looking to strive to cling to holiness or to touch upon holiness. As an unpacking of these three paragraphs of this chapter, I would strongly encourage everyone to read Rabbi Steinsaltz's first chapter in his book My Rebbe, where he talks about what is a holy person in of itself. Okay, and it's fascinating because he's also talking about these concepts but in a little bit more practical way and talking about what does it mean to be a holy person and what does it mean to encounter a holy person and a great person in that way. After reading this and after contemplating it and thinking about it, a person who is holy is bringing holiness to the world and to where they're at, regardless of their connection or what they're doing their actions or their relationship with people or anything around them. Just the fact that they're there is creating a sense of holiness. We see this already when it describes the parsha of Vayetze. Vayetze Yaakov mi Beersheba. And Yaakov left Beersheba. And Rashi says, a tzaddik leaves, a holy person leaves. It's like as if it's like he didn't have to speak to anybody. He didn't do anything. It's not as if now he's not teaching Torah there. It's rather a certain entity left, and therefore the reality of that place changed. You felt the whole the whole relationship between the worlds, this world and the above worlds, has changed in that place because that connection has left. Not because of the Torah that it's teaching, and not because of the examples you can follow, but rather because this entity has moved from one place to another. And it's something to understand in the world, and it's something to contemplate and to understand that exists in the world, and to seek it and to look for it. Because once you touch it and once you can make a connection like this, like he says, it becomes the most heart-stirring and consequential of all human relationships. And that's why I'm saying in speaking to I that, I've experienced this. I think. Not I think, I know. It's to be connected with a person who really at the end of the day has no desire in of itself himself, and just is functioning on a level of just trying to manifest and reveal godliness in the world. It's hard to put into words the feeling of how to describe that type of connection with that type of person. And it's something that I wish for everybody to be able to experience in their lifetime, because it's life-changing. It's also annoying because it makes life a lot more meaningful, and sometimes too much meaning becomes a burden. It makes you not be. I think I said this once over here. I had a friend who came to Rabbi Steinsaltz once and said he wasn't what we call dati anymore during that period of time. He wasn't keeping Shabbat and stuff like that. But he said to Rabbi Steinsaltz, I really have a grudge against you. I resent you. And Rabbi Steinsaltz says, why? He says, because you cause me that I can never really enjoy my Yetzer Hara. Because I encountered you, I just can't. You killed it for me. I've seen what it's like on the other side, and now when I try to just live a regular life, there's always this like itch that I can't scratch. Thank you very much. I'd rather be ignorant of that of what exists in the world regarding holiness.
One of the things, though, listen, I feel like I've encountered it as well. One of my big regrets is I don't feel like I fully took advantage of it the way I should have. But what I will say is Rabbi Steinsaltz, there is something we can all learn that is very accessible to everybody. And Rabbi Steinsaltz said this to the Steinsaltz, Makor Chaim Steinsaltz ambassadors that came to America for 12 years and went to different communities. And one of the things, I forget which set, the first or second set, said, what should we be talking about with the students in Jewish schools that we're working at? And he said, and I have to tell you, when I heard this, I was shocked. And now that I think about it, I don't know why I was shocked. But he said, you should make sure that they learn stories of tzaddikim. And the thing is that big segments of the religious Jewish world are terrified of doing that. They feel uncomfortable with it. It feels somehow, I've heard people say it's like Christianity, or we're worshiping human beings, or this or that. But the truth is that the way we learn about holy people, and we learn about how they live their lives, and that we can glean any lessons from them, is by hearing stories about how they went through their life. It's invaluable. In fact, one of the modern Orthodox day school in our town, it's an amazing school. But one of the things, like when the people I know who are involved on the board there, I keep pushing them, Shmuel and I keep pushing them, you need to have pictures of tzaddikim on your walls. You need to tell stories about them. And they don't have to be the same ones that are at the yeshivish school or at the Chabad school or whatever, but you need to impart the idea that there are people that are holy.
There's
and
such
that
a thing as holiness.
Yes. Through human beings, and we learn about them. We learn about them. Even their memories, even stories about them are precious.
So that's those three paragraphs. I thought it was a good way to wrap up these 4 chapters, because it brings it down to something relevant, a little bit off the wall. It's not something we're so used to, as if we were used to all those worlds he was talking about before and angels, but it brings it siphons it down to something very, very real. It's real. It's in this world. It's right here. You just got to seek it and be careful at the same time, because you're seeking the same way we're looking for truth. The seeking also has to be truthful in order to find truth. And that's going to be the other part of the equation. The only way you're going to find true holiness and true real truth is if you're seeking it truthful, if you're looking for the right things. So, yeah.
This is Shoshana. I just wanted to say that there's a book that when I was little, everybody had, but it's out of print, called Love Your Neighbor. You might have it on your shelf somewhere. Anyway, it's stories of tzaddikim, and I always think about that in my day school education. Those types of stories, I had a very good day school education in terms of text and everything else, but what you're saying is true. Those stories, I can feel those stories. I can still feel those stories. And I do think I've found that book to give to people, because I feel like those stories, like a lot of, Rav Yisrael Salanter was one of my favorites, but, there's something about those that goes straight to your heart. And it's true that I understand why Rabbi Steinsaltz said that.
Listen, it's not a coincidence that our Torah starts off with a whole bunch of stories of this guy went here and he traveled here and he walked over here and he had an issue over here. It's like all narrations about Sipuray Tzaddikim, stories of Tzaddikim, and they don't seem like great Tzaddikim, by the way. But we believe they were holy, and and then we got to understand how so and what. And it's all about stories. It's all about stories about these individuals.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much for joining.
If you could send me like a picture of that book, author, I would love to know it.
All right, everybody. We'll see you next week. Thank you for joining. And
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Arthur, could you stay on? I have a question for you, a private question.